Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. This was no longer just about livestock, it was about the very fabric of their community unraveling. As whispers spread like wildfire, she realized that the town she had returned to was on the brink of something far worse than they could imagine. "Let's go," she said, her voice steadying as she moved toward the door. "We need to see for ourselves." As she stepped outside, she was met with a chilling wind, a premonition of the horrors that awaited them under the moonlit sky. The night air was thick with tension as Emily hurried after the boy, the townspeople trailing behind her in a mix of curiosity and dread. They moved quickly down the dirt road toward the farm, a place that had always felt safe and familiar. But as they approached, an unsettling silence enveloped them, the usual sounds of the night conspicuously absent. The boy led them to a large pen where the cows were usually kept. What they saw was beyond comprehension. The animals were milling about, but not in their typical calm manner. They were agitated, their eyes wide and wild. Some were butting against the fence, others were bellowing in distress, their bodies trembling as if sensing an unseen threat. Emily stepped forward, her heart racing. What happened to them? She asked the boy, who seemed to shrink back under her intense gaze. "I don't know. I just saw them acting weird and ran to get you," he stammered, his voice quivering. As the group drew closer, a collective gasp echoed through the crowd. One cow suddenly reared back, letting out a deep, guttural sound that sent chills down everyone's spines. It charged toward the fence, crashing against it with a force that rattled the wooden posts. "This isn't normal," Emily muttered, her mind racing. She had studied animal behavior, but this was something else entirely. The animals were exhibiting signs of extreme distress, as if they sensed something horrific lurking just beyond their comprehension. Suddenly, a low growl erupted from the shadows. The townspeople turned, eyes wide with fear. From the darkness, a figure emerged, its gait unnatural, jerky and disjointed. Emily squinted, struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. As the figure stepped into the dim light, gasps of horror filled the air. It was one of the farmers, Ben, who had been missing for days. His clothes were torn, and his skin appeared ashen, almost gray under the moonlight. His eyes, once filled with life, now looked vacant, devoid of any humanity. "Ben!" someone shouted, stepping forward, but Emily grabbed their arm, her instinct screaming at her to stay back. "Wait, we don't know what's happening," she urged. Ben's head snapped in their direction, and a low growl escaped his lips. The fear in the crowd surged, and before anyone could react, he lunged forward, a terrifying roar ripping from his throat. Panic erupted. Townspeople screamed and scattered, tripping over each other in their frantic escape. Emily's mind raced. She needed to understand what had happened to Ben. She glanced at the cows, still riled up, and a horrifying thought crossed her mind. This could be the beginning of something catastrophic. "Get to the town hall. Lock the doors," she shouted, pushing her way through the chaos. She was determined to regroup, to devise a plan. As she sprinted back toward the safety of the building, she could hear the sounds of confusion behind her, the pounding of hooves and cries of terror. Ben's growls echoed, blending with the screams of townspeople. The realization hit her hard. The town was not just facing a crisis with livestock, it was being overrun by something far more insidious. Reaching the town hall, Emily burst through the doors and quickly turned to lock them behind her. The air inside felt stifling, the fear palpable as the remaining townsfolk gathered, breathless and terrified. "Emily, what do we do?" a voice called from the crowd. It was Joan, her face pale and streaked with sweat. "We need to assess the situation," Emily replied, forcing herself to remain calm. "We should secure the exits and contact the authorities. If this is some kind of infection." An infection? Mary's voice cut through the tension, her demeanor still unsettlingly cold. "You think it's contagious?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but we need to be prepared for the worst. This isn't just an animal problem, it's affecting us." As she spoke, a shudder ran through the building, a distant thump reverberated against the walls, followed by the unmistakable sound of pounding fists. The townspeople's eyes widened in horror as they realized they were not safe. "Whatever this is, it's coming for us," Emily said, her voice firm. "We need to stick together and figure out what we're dealing with. No one goes outside until we know more." The group nodded, some looking to her for leadership, others still gripped by fear. But in that moment of unity, Emily felt a flicker of hope. They were still a community, and together, they might just stand a chance against the dark tide that threatened to consume them. "Let's gather supplies," she instructed, her mind racing with strategies. "We need food, water, and anything we can use for defense. If we're going to face this, we need to be ready." As the townspeople moved about the hall, their fear palpable but tempered by resolve, Emily couldn't shake the sense that this was just the beginning. The shadows were closing in, and the true horror of Pine Hollow was only just awakening. Determined to uncover the truth behind the bizarre events engulfing Pine Hollow, Emily Carter embarked on her investigation with a sense of urgency. Her childhood home, now a blend of nostalgia and scientific ambition, became her base of operations. The basement, cluttered with remnants of her youth, a forgotten bicycle, old boxes of family photos, was now transformed into a makeshift lab, filled with beakers, test tubes, and her old scientific equipment. The following morning, with the town still reeling from the terrifying events at the town hall, Emily set out to collect water samples from various locations around Pine Hollow. She visited the river that wound through town, the local well, and even the taps of some businesses. Each location bore a heavy silence, the usual chatter of the townsfolk replaced by an eerie stillness. As she filled her vials, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The familiar streets felt foreign, the people she'd known for years now shrouded in fear and suspicion. Shaking off her unease, she reminded herself that the investigation was critical. If there was a threat in the water, she needed to identify it before more lives were lost. Once she had gathered a sufficient number of samples, Emily returned home, her mind racing with possibilities. She meticulously labeled each vial, documenting where and when each sample was taken. As she prepared her equipment, she couldn't help but replay the chaos of the town hall meeting in her mind. The wild eyes of her neighbors, the primal growls of Ben, the uncertainty that had gripped everyone. Emily worked late into the night, her only company the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. She ran tests on each water sample, looking for contaminants, pathogens, or anything that could explain the bizarre behavior of the townspeople and livestock. Hours passed as she moved between her instruments, the rhythmic beeping of machines becoming a soothing background to her frenzied thoughts. Finally, as dawn broke, she began to see the first signs of something alarming. Under the microscope, a strange organism glowed faintly, its structure unlike anything she had ever encountered. She cross-referenced it with her database but found no matches. With growing dread, she prepared slides for more detailed analysis. As she worked, her mind raced through her knowledge of virology and microbiology. The implications of discovering a new virus were immense, and the thought sent a shiver down her spine. If this virus was causing the aggressive behavior she had witnessed, How long had it been in the water? How was it affecting her friends and neighbors? Hours passed, and Emily's exhaustion began to cloud her focus, but she pressed on. Finally, the results came in. The virus was present in each sample she had collected. It was a virus that altered the host's behavior, inducing extreme aggression and an insatiable hunger for flesh. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her heart racing. How could this happen? She whispered to herself, staring at the data. The results were clear. The virus affected not only animals but humans as well, altering their cognition and turning them into something monstrous. Panic surged through her, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. She pulled out her notebook, sketching diagrams and notes as her mind raced with the implications. If the virus spread through the water supply, it could have already infected a significant portion of the town. Emily needed to act fast. Taking a deep breath, she stood and paced the small basement, formulating a plan. First, she needed to warn the town and provide evidence of her findings. But how could she convince them? The fear that had gripped Pine Hollow would make them hesitant to accept her claims. She needed a strategy. She decided to gather a small group of trusted friends to discuss her findings. Emily knew she could rely on Joan, Mark, and a few others who had remained level-headed during the chaos. Together, they could create a plan to alert the rest of the town while also preparing for the worst. Before she could make her move, though, she needed to collect more evidence. Emily considered the remaining samples and realized she needed to conduct further tests to pinpoint the virus's origin and how it might be treated or contained. After cleaning her workspace, Emily returned to the water source, this time focusing on the river and the well. She hoped that by collecting more samples, she could trace the contamination back to a specific area or event. Perhaps there was an industrial accident or something more sinister at play. As she drove towards the river, a sense of foreboding gripped her. The landscape that once seemed peaceful was now a haunting reminder of what was at stake. She parked her car and approached the water, the usual sounds of nature strangely muted. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen threat. Bending down to fill her vials, she noticed something in the water, a strange shimmer that looked out of place. Emily leaned closer, her heart pounding. It was a slick film covering the surface, and as she dipped her fingers into it, a cold chill shot through her.